The awesome thing about what if stories is it lets writers really explore their passions and set their creative minds free when it comes to concepts for character development and greater stories. It allows them to test out stories that might be considered high risk or just unlikely to get greenlit in the main continuity, and through offering a glimpse into these alternate worlds and timelines, they sometimes can even convince Marvel to make changes to the main continuity permanently that reflect their one-shot what if. Or as permanently as comics will allow, I suppose. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. Today we're going to be returning to the fantastical world of Marvel's What If as we count down the top 10 Marvel What If stories that came true, taking a closer look at stories that inspired main continuity and main continuity adjacent adventures and character changes throughout the comics, films, and television. Join me as we get counting. Number 10. What if Captain America hadn't vanished during World War II? Captain America did vanish during World War II in the main continuity, but there is another important plot point in this story that we've seen happen more than once in comics, and that is Bucky Barnes taking over as Captain America. While Bucky was believed dead for years in the comics, he eventually returned in the early 2000s as the Winter Soldier, and it was revealed while being suspected as deceased after falling from a plane and being reported MIA that he had actually survived all these years. We've seen him take over and become Captain America both during the House of M event and in the main continuity during Brubaker's run of Captain America in 2008. And he also died as Captain America in the main continuity as well, so that's pretty interesting. Or we thought he died. Who knows if that would have been the truth in the What If story if it had continued. Number 9. What if Iron Man had been a traitor? It might have not gone down the same way as it did in the What If, but a version of this story did end up becoming true in the Bizarre Crossing event in the mid-90s. Here it was revealed that Iron Man was actually a traitor, though this time around a less innocent one. It was revealed he had been made Kang's sleeper agent and was working in league with the villain. In the end, traitorous Tony Stark died, and a younger version of himself, still good since he had been taken from a point in his timeline before Iron Man had been influenced by Kang, took his place. In the What If special, he instead becomes a traitor working for China against his nation and his fellow teammates and friends. Fortunately, Iron Man is rescued from being used as a pawn by Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four, who received his message requesting help. So he wasn't as traitorous in that story as he was in the main continuity. Number 8. What if this was the Fantastic Four? This was a story told as part of the Hero Initiative. Mike Wieringo had been working on the What If story before he suddenly passed away and had completed 7 pages of it. As such, the release date for the story was pushed back and it was utilized as a tribute for the amazing artist. The story is kind of an interesting special case where the What If was actually inspired by a true story that came before it from the main continuity, between issues 347 to 349 of the Fantastic Four series. The alternate team comprised of the Hulk as Joe Fixit, Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Danny Ketch as Ghost Rider stepped in to replace the Fantastic Four after they were tricked into believing most of the original team had actually perished by a Skrull who was posing as the Invisible Woman. I think it was Delilah. I think that's how we still say her name, it's like D apostrophe. Delilah? Yeah, I think so. This team was brought back a few more times in the comics and eventually became known as the go-to FF substitute team and team members, and are still referred to as such in comics today. This 2008 What If series imagined an alternate retelling where the team simply remained as the only FF left after the Skrull who had tricked them killed the original team members instead of simply incapacitating them. Wieringo was also misinformed during the creation of the What If and instead drew Johnny Blaze as Ghost Rider instead of Danny Ketch as Ghost Rider. Although this was going to be corrected before the book was published, because of his passing, Marvel decided to leave the art as it was, as opposed to altering Mike's art after his passing. Which I kind of agree with that decision, because I feel like that would have been really distasteful to his memory to change it. So instead we get Johnny Blaze, but other than that, this is a crew that's already happened in the comics. Number 7. What if Punisher's family hadn't been killed? Though of course in this story the Punisher's family is still killed, because yeah, it's kind of hard for Frank Castle to even become any version of the Punisher otherwise. However, instead of him being inspired to take up arms after his family gets caught in the crossfire of a mob hit and killed, they survive that fateful day, all because it rained on their picnic. Whew, that's some lucky rain. Frank becomes inspired to join the force and become a police officer. However, when offered a bribe, he reports the incident to his captain, hoping to book the crooks who are paying off the cops to look the other way. In the end, it's revealed that even his captain is part of this scheme, and he and his family are still targeted, but this time by some dirty cops. He survives, however, and becomes the Punisher. While this story does not make its way into the main continuity of Earth 616, this was basically verbatim the backstory used for the Ultimate Punisher from the kind of main continuity adjacent Earth of 1610. After all, there was a time when Ultimate was so big it was like basically an alternate main continuity. Number 6. What if Jessica Jones had joined the Avengers? Not surprisingly, this story was written by Brian Michael Bendis. In the What If, we get to see a hypothetical world where Jessica Jones is offered a spot on the Avengers shortly after she attacked them after being mind controlled by the Purple Man, Kilgrave. Here, she joins the team and ends up marrying Captain America. In reality, aka the main continuity, Jessica Jones would end up joining the new Avengers alongside her husband on Earth 616, Luke Cage, 6 years later in terms of the comic's release date, joining up with the team in 2010's New Avengers run in issue number 1. Can you guess who the writer was for that issue? Yep, Brian Michael Bendis. Brian Michael Bendis' New Avengers. I like that though. I like Jessica Jones on the Avengers. I think that's cool. Number 5. What if General Ross had become the Hulk? This story came out only a few years before General Ross became the villain and beast known as Red Hulk. Although this story isn't quite as close to the original as our previous point. The What If story was written by Peter Davis, while the issue where Ross takes up the mantle of Red Hulk happens in an issue of Hulk written by Jeff Loeb. So we've got 2 different writers for this one as opposed to them both being the same person. And a dark twist, General Ross in the What If issue ends up becoming the Hulk in the place of Bruce Banner. He becomes a rage-fueled monster who has to be put down by Bruce himself after he kills his own daughter Betty by accident when he tosses a tank which lands, crushing her. Devastating. Number 4. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? This one takes a different direction but arrives at the same goal. In the What If story, Spider-Man, instead of being turned away by the FF on their first meeting with him when he attempts to join up, offers to hear him out. Sue convinces her team to listen to Spider-Man, and they eventually decide that he can join their team, becoming the Fantastic Five instead of the Fantastic Four. All 5s on their chest. In the end, Sue ends up leaving the team with Spider-Man feeling that him showing her up was what caused her to leave. Wow, big ego much, Spider-Man? She ends up choosing to leave the FF and be with Namor, and he transforms her into an Atlantean, intending for Sue to become his queen. In the main continuity, Spider-Man joins the new version of the FF at the time, known as the Future Foundation, instead after the other Storm sibling has left. Johnny Storm was thought to be dead at that time, and so Spider-Man basically fills in his spot on the Fantastic Four team. To this day, Spider-Man is still considered to be on the extended roster to fill in as a substitute member when needed. Number 3. What if the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner? Well, this one might not line up exactly either. You'll definitely see similarities when it comes to the premise. In this story, we get to see what would happen if the Hulk ended up being as level-headed and intelligent as Bruce Banner. Sound familiar? Later on in 1991, we get our first look at a version of the Hulk that was Bruce Banner, the Grey Hulk persona, and the Green Hulk persona merged, leading us down a road to what we later come to know as Professor Hulk. Of course, in the What If, we also saw a new being named X-Man come into being when Mr. Fantastic, Professor X, and Intelligent Hulk merged in an attempt to defeat Galactus. And I don't think we've seen that part come true just yet. Number 2. What if Jane Foster had found the hammer of Thor? In this issue, we see what would happen if Jane Foster were the one to find and retrieve Thor's hammer, being deemed worthy by the weapon to wield it. She takes up the name Thordis in this issue and ends up fighting Loki. Upon meeting Odin, even in her Thordis form, he still does not like Jane, seeing her as an imposter, a Valkyrie in Thor's raiment. In the end, Odin gets over his distaste of Thordis and Jane Foster after she helps him to avert Ragnarok. He does make her give the hammer back to Thor, who is currently Donald Blake, but as a reward he also makes her an Asgardian goddess. Not a bad trade. In the main continuity, Jane became Lady Thor after Thor was deemed not worthy and the hammer called to her. Number 1. What if Thor was the Herald of Galactus? This one recently came true in Donny Cates' current run on Thor. Thor and Galactus teamed up initially to take on the universal threat that was the Black Winter. However, this idea was initially explored by Robert Kirkman more than 10 years earlier in the 2005 What If Thor. In this What If story, Thor becomes the herald of Galactus and instead teams up with him to take on Loki, who has conquered Asgard and killed Odin after initially agreeing to become Galactus' herald to save Asgard from his hunger. Thor instead decides to let Galactus devour Asgard now that it is in ruins, and Loki rules it, first allowing his friends and fellow Asgardians who survived Loki's initial assault to escape to Midgard. Then he murders a bunch of frost giants and lets Galactus have his fill. Basically, what ifs are not just amazing and ridiculous fun and sometimes depressing one-shots, they are also used at Marvel to test the waters for potential stories that could also be great in the main continuity. That is why what ifs are not only interesting to read, but they're also super important in regards to creative exploration and freedoms. Are there any what ifs that have yet to come true that you think should, or definitely shouldn't? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host, Amanda McKnight. You stay nerdy, YouTube.